"Sorry, ma'am, we're going with someone who better fits the company image." The HR manager glanced at her scarf, barely hiding the scar running down her throat. Amelia Hayes, 34, stood silently, no protest, just nodded and left. But they didn't. No, the man she once saved in a war zone was now a general at the Pentagon. And 15 minutes later, his call would shake the entire department. "Comment respect Amelia if you believe real warriors wear scars." Amelia Hayes stepped off the tram into the quiet hum of downtown Arlington. Her gray coat neatly buttoned, a thin scarf tied gently around her neck. She clutched a leather folder, closed to her chest. Inside, copies of her degree, certifications in HR, and 2 letters of recommendation from professors who knew how hard she had fought to restart her life. Her boots clicked softly on the pavement as she approached the tall glass tower of Landon Tech Solutions, a rising software company claiming to value diversity and human-first leadership. It was her 3rd job interview this season, and she felt something quietly hopeful about it, maybe because this time she truly believed she had earned her place here. Amelia, 34 years old, was a former Army medic who had served 3 deployments between Iraq and Afghanistan. On her last mission, a rocket blast near Fallujah had sprayed shrapnel across her team. She saved 3 lives that day, but a metal fragment tore into her throat, damaging her vocal cords beyond full repair. Her voice would never sound the same again, low, uneven, sometimes raspy even in silence. For months afterward, Amelia barely spoke. When she finally left the service, she didn't look for pity, she looked for purpose. She studied nights, took side jobs, and completed her HR degree in under 3 years. Her dream was to work in employee advocacy, ensuring others didn't get left behind. She had memorized every detail of the company's values before entering that office. The lobby gleamed with green accents and glass panels. A receptionist greeted her with a polite nod and offered a badge. At exactly 10 a.m., a young woman in a smart blazer opened the door to a second-floor conference room and said, "Miss Hayes." Amelia stood, smiled, and entered confidently. 3 interviewers sat on the other side of a frosted glass table: Claire, the HR director; Marcus, a project lead; and Jaime, a younger HR associate. The introductions were crisp. Amelia shook hands, took her seat, and began answering questions about her conflict resolution strategies and how she'd build equity in workplace hiring. Her voice, though slightly raspy, carried calm and conviction. She paused when needed, smiled when she meant it, and drew from real-life examples. For a moment, she thought she saw something shift in Marcus's eyes, like he was impressed. But then Claire leaned forward slightly, her gaze drifting to Amelia's neck. Her scarf had loosened just enough to reveal part of the pale scar arching toward her jaw. Amelia noticed the pause. It wasn't long, but it was enough. The next question came slower. Jaime asked about public-facing responsibilities. Amelia gave a thoughtful answer. Claire's face stiffened. The folder closed with a soft click. Claire offered a carefully worded smile and said, "Miss Hayes, thank you for your time. We admire your service truly." Amelia nodded slowly. "Of course." Claire hesitated. "That said, we're a very brand-conscious company. This position involves regular client presentations. First impressions do matter in our line of work." "Are you saying my appearance is a problem?" Amelia asked, her voice steady. Claire's smile didn't move. "We just want someone who fits the culture, someone who reflects a modern, polished image for our clients." Jaime looked away. Marcus adjusted his watch. The silence felt longer than it was. Amelia closed her folder, stood slowly, and offered her hand. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said before walking out of the room. She passed the reception desk, where 2 younger employees whispered, and one let out a half laugh. Amelia didn't stop. She had walked through heavier fire than this, but that didn't make it sting less. She stepped outside into the gray morning light and paused at the crosswalk. The traffic moved, but her feet stayed planted. Her hand gripped the folder tighter. She tilted her head back, letting the scarf fall slightly from her throat. The scar, clean but unmistakable, gleamed in the reflection of the office tower's glass. A delivery driver passed and nodded quietly. She nodded back. In that moment, there was no applause, No recognition, no public defense, only the sound of tires on asphalt, a pigeon's wings beating overhead, and a single truth in her mind: some battles happen after the war ends. And this one had just begun. In the summer of 2010, under the searing sun of Kirkuk, Iraq, Amelia Hayes was not just a medic, she was a lifeline. Her unit had been dispatched to deliver supplies to a rural checkpoint when an explosion ripped through the air. The IED had been buried shallow, and when it went off, it flipped the lead vehicle on its side and blew shrapnel in all directions. Dust clouded the convoy, alarms blared, and the smell of burning metal filled her nose. She didn't wait for orders. Amelia jumped from the back of her Humvee and sprinted toward the wreckage. Screams pierced through the smoke. Blood covered her hands before she even reached the first injured soldier. There, amid the chaos, lay a man with wounds too deep for a normal field dressing. A fragment had torn into his shoulder and leg bone was visible, and he was fading fast. That man was Lieutenant Colonel David M. Callahan. Amelia didn't flinch. As bullets echoed in the distance, she dropped beside him and opened her kit. But before she could even finish assessing the injury, a second blast sent debris flying. A sliver of metal cut across her throat. The impact was instant. Her vision swam. She gasped, then coughed, but didn't fall. Blood was warm at her collar. Her hands shook as she grabbed gauze from her pack and pressed it against her own neck. And then she kept going. She tied off a tourniquet on Callahan's leg, pressed down hard to slow the bleeding on his shoulder, and whispered to him through gritted teeth, "You stay with me, sir, you stay right here." By the time evac arrived, Amelia had stabilized 3 others and refused treatment for herself, until every soldier was on board the chopper. Later, at the field hospital, doctors told her the shrapnel had done permanent damage to her vocal cords. She would never speak the same again. She nodded, didn't cry, didn't complain. "Can I still work?" she asked them with the voice she had left. They told her no, combat duty was over. After months of recovery and forced medical discharge, Amelia returned to the States with a voice that now scraped across silence and a scar that curved just beneath her jaw. But she carried no bitterness. The uniform came off, not the mission. She once said to a fellow veteran, "I'm still here to serve." While others tried to forget the war, Amelia tried to honor it. She took a job as a volunteer coordinator at a local veterans center in Norfolk. There, she helped build support programs for returning female service members, many of whom battled invisible scars. On weekends, she tutored GED students. In the evenings, she studied HR textbooks, enrolled in night classes, and earned her degree with honors. Her professors remembered her not just for her grades, but for her calm voice, even when speaking hurt, and her unwavering moral compass. She lived simply in a 1-bedroom apartment with second-hand furniture and a wall covered in index cards of affirmations. Her favorite read, "It's not about being seen, it's about making others feel seen." For years, Amelia quietly rebuilt herself. When people asked about the scar, she'd smile and say, "It's just one of the quieter parts of my story." Few knew that the man whose life she had saved, Colonel Callahan, had gone on to become a brigadier general and now served at the Pentagon. Even fewer knew he tried to recommend her for a Medal of Valor. Amelia declined. "There were others who did more," she said. "I just did my job." She never sought attention, never posted war photos, but she showed up at job fairs for disabled veterans, at hospitals where she read books aloud to wounded troops, even when her voice rasped after long days. Once, at a small leadership seminar, she stood in front of a group of HR interns and told them, "I don't need people to feel sorry for the scar, I just need them to see beyond it." That sentence stayed with a dozen people in the room, and years later, it would be quoted again when her story reached far wider than she ever imagined. Amelia believed in second chances not just for herself, but for everyone. She believed that systems could change if people inside them were brave enough to act. And she believed that a voice didn't need to be loud to be heard, all it needed was truth behind it. Her entire journey, every scar, every silent act of service had prepared her for that one morning in Arlington when a company looked at her and saw only what was missing. What they failed to see was everything she brought with her, sometimes late at night, Amelia would sit by her window with a warm drink and replay that moment in Kirkuk, not the explosion, but the choice she made, bleeding and breathless, to keep someone else alive. That choice, she believed, was the foundation of her life. It wasn't her scar that defined her, it was her ability to keep moving forward, without asking the world to owe her anything. And in that quiet persistence, she carried the weight of a generation who returned home and tried every day to build again. How Amelia stood at the bus stop across from the office building, the sharp wind brushing against her scarf. She clutched her folder tightly, still hearing the HR manager's words echoing in her head, more approachable in appearance. That's what they had said. She didn't cry, but she didn't move either. For a few long minutes, she just stood there, staring at her reflection in the darkened glass of a closed cafe window. Behind her, people walked past, earbuds in, coffee cups in hand, unaware of the battle that had just taken place inside. For walls of polished steel and fake smiles, she turned slowly and began to walk, one step at a time, heading toward the metro station. What she didn't know was that one of the junior employees inside the company had seen everything. Her name was Sophia, a part-time intern just 3 weeks into the job. She had watched the interview from across the hall and had seen the shift in the HR manager's tone, the glances, the awkward silence. She had heard about Amelia Hayes before, read an article about a veteran advocacy panel last fall, where Amelia had quietly shared her story. Sophia's uncle was a veteran. She knew what that scar meant, and she knew what it didn't. While Amelia was walking away from the building, Sophia typed a message on her phone. It was short. It was direct. It went to someone she had only met once, during a military networking event her uncle had invited her to. That someone was General David Callahan. The message read, "Sir, I believe you need to know something about someone named Amelia Hayes." Within 15 minutes, the office phone at Landon Tech rang. The receptionist answered and immediately stiffened. Yes, I'll transfer you to HR." The call was passed from hand to hand until it reached Claire, the same HR manager who had just dismissed Amelia, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, this is Claire speaking." "Miss Claire, this is General David Callahan, Department of Defense." There was a pause on the line. Claire blinked. Yes, how can I help you?" "I understand you just interviewed a woman named Amelia Hayes." "Yes, we did. But I'm not sure. She saved my life in Iraq with her throat torn open. She kept me alive until the evac team arrived. I have a full range of motion in my right arm today because of her. That scar on her neck, that's not a flaw, that's a badge of honor. And if you can't see that, then maybe your company isn't qualified to hire leaders." Claire stammered. We made a hiring decision based on, I'm not calling to argue," Callahan said firmly. "I'm calling to inform. I've already forwarded your company's conduct to a few contacts in our Civilian-Military Partnership Council. You may be receiving questions soon about your stated diversity values and actual hiring practices." Before she could respond, the line clicked. He had hung up. Across town, Amelia sat on a bench, staring at the pigeons fighting over a discarded sandwich wrapper. Her phone buzzed a known number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello," a warm voice responded. "Amelia Hayes, yes, this is General David Callahan. I think you might remember pulling shrapnel out of me under gunfire." She let out a small, surprised laugh. "How could I forget? I heard what happened today. I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." There was a pause. "I'm not calling to fix it," he said. "I'm calling to offer something better. We've just created a new civilian HR role within the DoD for Veterans Transition Services. I want you to apply. You don't need to prove anything, just be who you already are." Amelia sat silently for a moment, then said softly, "General, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything, just show up like you always do." Later that day, a formal inquiry was launched into Landon Tech's HR procedures. Within a week, the company issued a public apology, though Amelia never acknowledged it. The internet, however, did. A viral post from Sophia, simply titled, "The Scar They Couldn't See," was shared across veteran forums and LinkedIn. A photo of Amelia standing at the crosswalk, taken unknowingly by Sophia from a distance, showed a woman upright, still dignified in defeat. The caption read, She walked out with less than she came in except grace. She left with more of that. The comment section flooded with thousands of voices. She's my hero. I want my daughter to see this. I'm a hiring manager, and I've just learned something today. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., a general placed a folder on his desk with the name Amelia Hayes on the cover. He smiled. The world had finally begun to listen. Amelia didn't post about it. She didn't tweet, didn't complain, didn't write a think piece. She simply went home, folded her blazer neatly, and placed her resume back into a worn leather folder. But the world, it seemed, had already started to speak for her. The HR assistant who had watched it all in silence that day, who had laughed nervously but felt the shame burn deeper, was the first to act. That night, she anonymously messaged a veteran advocacy page, describing what she had witnessed. The page posted without names. A female veteran with a neck scar was turned down because she didn't look approachable. The person who said that forgot one thing: that scar speaks of courage. Most of us have never known. In less than 48 hours, the post reached over 1 million views. Thousands of veterans and civilians alike flooded the comments with messages of support. Some shared their own scars, physical and emotional. Some simply wrote, "We see you." But it didn't stop at comments. Something deeper began to stir. A journalist from a local news outlet traced the story and eventually contacted Amelia. She declined to appear on video, but agreed to an interview on one condition: no close-ups of the scar and no pity headlines. The article ran with the title, "What Courage Sounds Like." In it, Amelia's story was told simply: how she had once wrapped her own wound in the battlefield to save another, and how now her voice was judged before it could even be heard. That article traveled further than anyone expected. A regional HR conference cited it as a turning point in how visual bias is understood in the hiring process. Several companies updated their interview training, adding a new line to the feedback forms where judgments made on appearance over substance. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened at the Pentagon. General David Callahan, the man whose life Amelia had saved, gave a quiet briefing to the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Labor. He didn't demand consequences for the company that rejected her. Instead, he proposed a new interdepartmental pilot project. Recite its mission to ensure veteran candidates are evaluated not just fairly, but holistically. "We train soldiers to see through walls," he said in the meeting. "It's time our HR systems learned to see through scars." But it wasn't the policy or the press that reached Amelia most. It was a letter, no name, no return address, just a white envelope slipped under her door with shaky handwriting. "My daughter is 14. She has a birthmark that makes her hide from the world. I showed her your story," she said. "For the first time. Maybe I'm brave like that, too. Thank you." Amelia sat at her small kitchen table, holding that note, her hands trembling not from fear or shame, but from something older, deeper, the feeling of being understood, of being more than the sum of a scar. A few weeks later, Amelia accepted an offer not from a company, but from a non-profit that supported veteran reintegration. They didn't care about how she looked. They asked, "Would you help others like you?" She said, "Yes." She started small, consulting on workshops, rewriting training materials, and eventually speaking softly but firmly at conferences around the country. Her voice never fully recovered, but that didn't matter. She said less, but people listened more. At one such event, a young woman came up after the session, eyes wide and unsure. She had burns down one side of her neck. She whispered, "I didn't know we were allowed to still dream big." Amelia smiled, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and replied, "We don't need permission to be whole." The story didn't end in a courtroom or with a headline. It lived on in conversations that changed tone, in HR policies rewritten quietly, in mirrors where scars were no longer something to hide. And sometimes, late at night, Amelia would log into the Veteran Support Forum under her screen name, Ecomedic, and write short entries. One of them read, "Sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it clears its throat, steadies what's left, and speaks anyway." It was a small community college in Maryland that invited her to speak last. Not a grand auditorium, not a national stage, Just a modest classroom with 23 students and a whiteboard that barely worked. Amelia almost said no, but something about the simplicity called to her. She arrived early, stood quietly in the back while students filed in. When the professor introduced her, they clapped out of respect, not recognition. Few knew her story in full. That was fine with her. She walked to the front, her scarf tucked neatly over her collar. She didn't start with titles or ranks. She didn't mention Iraq. Instead, she picked up a marker, wrote one sentence on the board. What does a scar teach us? Then she turned, met their eyes, and began not with power, but with presence. Her voice, still damaged, was soft but deliberate. She told them about moments, choosing to act when afraid, choosing to speak when unheard, choosing to stand when overlooked. She paused often, not to dramatize, but to breathe. Every silence held weight. Every breath was a reminder. Not every voice needs to be loud to change something. Afterward, a girl from the front row approached her. She was no older than 19, wore long sleeves despite the heat. Her eyes were glassy, her hands fidgeting. I have burns, she said. I was 6. I always thought I had to hide them to be taken seriously. Amelia didn't offer advice. She simply reached into her folder and pulled out a small card, one she had started carrying with her in recent months. On it was written, "You are not broken, you are proof that healing is possible." She gave it to the girl and smiled gently. That same week, someone taped a quote to the college bulletin board. It read, "The scarred don't need sympathy, they need space to lead." No signature. At her own apartment, Amelia kept a small wooden box on a shelf. Inside were letters, notes, and mementos, none of them awards. One note was from General Callahan, another from a janitor who had once seen her speak. She didn't frame them, she didn't share them. She just opened the box once in a while and remembered, not everything good needs to be seen. She never returned to Landon Tech. She didn't need to. Their apology came too late, and in truth, she never read it because by then she had become something more than a rejected applicant. She had become a mirror for others to see themselves in, especially the parts they had been told to hide. One spring morning, she passed by a mural being painted on a city wall. It featured people with visible scars, burn survivors, amputees, cancer fighters. In the center was a woman standing tall with a single line beside her. She didn't raise her voice, she raised others. Amelia paused, looked up, then walked on, quiet, steady, unchanged. But everything behind her was different. Now, if a scar can make someone look twice, then maybe it's time we all look deeper. Comment respect Amelia if you believe quiet courage deserves the loudest recognition. And if someone ever helped you stand tall without asking for thanks, leave a like and carry their strength forward.